Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Killing of a Sacred Deer. This film came out in 2017. It was directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. I know that this is really sad and shameful to admit, but I had never seen a Lanthimos film until this one. And I saw this one a few days ago. I've been meaning to get to The Lobster, the favorite, Dogtooth, but I just haven't gotten around to it. He obviously has a very pointed style, a very auteur style that is very reminiscent of a lot of the films that you might have seen, American films in the 1970s, early 80s. With this film in particular, there's a very calculated, very removed quality to it that it's a lot like Kubrick. It's heavily borrowing from his work. I feel like I say this in almost every review I do, but it's just true. You just see a lot of Stanley Kubrick influence, particularly visually, and you definitely see that majorly here. He's borrowing from him in almost every sense, and like using the wide-angle lenses, the very controlled, very still, voyeuristic dolly shots that kind of follow people down hallways, lots of zooms, and just very fluid, very controlled camera movements. You also see it in the way that the characters interact with each other. I think Kubrick had a very specific way that his performers interacted with each other, and this one does too. The dialogue is very, very distinct. It is very strange and very calculated, very removed, but it also has that satirical bite, that tongue-in-cheek quality as well. You're also seeing the use of classical music and maybe like postmodern contemporary works as well, which is something that you saw a lot in movies like 2001, A Space Odyssey, and The Shining. And that's just what this movie is. It's a lot like you might see in a Robert Altman movie, in a Stanley Kubrick movie, just seeing human behavior through a magnifying glass or through like a telescope, and observing them in a way almost like we're aliens, so we get to see them from an outsider's point of view. You get to see them in the wild, in a sense. It's like, and with this film, it's trying to expose all of that. It's trying to expose humanity in an exaggerated nature. So, as I said, in a quite cheeky way, in a bombastic way, a very self-aware way. There have been a million movies that are like suburban satires, and I think that it makes sense. I mean, it is kind of the perfect setting for it. It's the perfect place to emphasize the bizarre, very absurd nature of just, etiquette, the philosophy behind the comedy of manners. The sad, weird contradiction that humans have this obsession nearly to kind of fit in, to be able to be accepted and to be proper. And yet there is such a fine line between that civility and complete barbarity. And it could snap at any moment, and it will. And that's where a lot of these types of suburban stories thrive, is in that place of the idea that it will eventually completely implode. And this film does have all that. Obviously, it's a satire that's a commentary on the American way of life, the American dream, but it's also a psychological thriller. And it's also like a Shakespearean allegory that deals with the nature of morality. Honestly, this movie to me is like if The Shining and Funny Games had a baby. The opening shot of this movie is quite memorable, one that you're probably not gonna forget. It's just you see a human heart just beating right there, and the camera slowly zooms out, and you see our main character Stephen, and he is an open heart surgeon, and he is performing a surgery. Obviously, most of the time, your opening shot is supposed to set the tone for what you're about to witness. And I think that this one, it is meant to shock you, obviously. It is meant to really unsettle you. But I think that it's also supposed to make you feel quite vulnerable as well. I mean, the camera is just so still, so voyeuristic as it zooms out on that really kind of soft, veiny red heart just pumping away. And it's such a frail looking organ. And there's something about that controlled nature of that camera, just like viewing it from above and just seeing it there so vulnerable. To think that soft tissued thing is keeping me alive right now is not very reassuring. But making Stephen, the character of Stephen, who is the protagonist, making him a open heart surgeon, I mean, obviously it's very on the nose and on purpose because, again, satirical, but it's crucial. Because open heart surgeons, you'd think, I mean, if you say you're an open heart surgeon, wow, you must be really revered, you must be very educated, very disciplined. But also, I think that, having that sort of vocation says something about who you are. I think that inherently you have to be somebody who really likes to have control, maybe. Maybe you are somebody who's really more of a leader. You like to be in charge, and I think that there's a major ego there. You have to have, I think, extreme confidence to be able to perform something like that, especially on a routine basis. And that's what Colin Farrell said, who plays Stephen in the movie. He was talking about in an interview I watched, he was talking about how he did visit with some open heart surgeons. It was how he did his research. And he did say that he noticed that they really did have a lot of self-assurance and there was definitely a lot of ego, and he wasn't judging them. It was just more an observation that, yeah, I mean, you would want somebody to be very confident, to be, operating on your heart, because you are holding somebody's life in your hands. In a way, it's as though you are like a god. In that moment, you pretty much determine that person's future. And I think Stephen, just like I would or anybody else, he kind of revels in that control, in that feeling of confidence. And I think that he does really like to have control in his life. It's very clear based on just the way his house looks, the way his family is. He gets off on that. And I think that this culture does, anybody does, we just get off on the idea of success, the things that we are very good at, because it gives us a sense of control. And even the fetish of him fucking his wife, where she's pretending that she's just, limp from anesthesia. I mean, if that doesn't say to you a lot about somebody who really wants to assert dominance and wants control, then I don't know what is. And though on paper he seems to be so perfect looking, as a character, and I would say this continues throughout the movie, he's not somebody that seems particularly self-aware or particularly wise, particularly insightful. He seems very weak and empty-headed, and in fact, a lot of the characters do. All of the characters do. And I really love the dialogue. I love the cadence of it. I know that it's not for everybody, and people have told me about that, but I like that vision for it, that idea for it. It's part of the hilarity, it's part of the awkwardness, part of the unpredictability, and that kind of deadpan sort of banality is, to me, really fascinating. It's mercurial, it's almost otherworldly in some ways, and that's what I like about this movie a lot, and what I like about Lanthimos's philosophy as a director. He's not going for anything that feels super organic and natural. No, he sees film as not reality. So logic doesn't matter. Things don't necessarily have to add up. Plot holes don't really matter, which I really appreciate. The characters really have no dimension other than what you see on the page and what you can kind of infer for yourself. And yet it's still, like, that kind of goes against a lot of the rules you'd think, but yet that is the key to this film's success. Through the dialogue, as the movie progresses, we start to see that darkness, we start to see that unpredictability and that toxicity bleed through so slowly, but yet always throughout, always. And this is, again, why it's key. It's always counteracted with something awkward or bizarre. And even in the third act, when things get really, really dark. And one of my favorite moments, and I think it's a moment that a lot of people recognize or remember, is the moment where the daughter is in the wheelchair, and obviously she looks really haunting and creepy. And there's that long shot where she says to her brother, "When you die, can I have your MP3 player? Please, please, please." It's such an unsettling moment, yet I think that there is more truth in it than you might think. I think that humans are, so contradictory in moments of great stress or panic or grief, whatever it is, danger. Like, for instance, like, you find out that your mother dies. Rather than crying, maybe you might just kind of go quiet and be like, I need to go wash the dishes. It's because, like, your mind, it's like it can't process the panic. It can't process just this major change, and so you just kind of want to go about your routine as, like, again, a sense of control. Or the idea of when someone dies, and yet families will fight over wills, and sisters might get angry, saying, like, "I deserve mom's wedding ring. No, I deserve it because I'm the oldest." And it seems so trite and so ridiculous because, the person is dead. We should be focusing on that. And moments like this in life inspire this kind of dialogue. They inspire the MP3 line. They inspire the moment, right before the big climax of the film, when Stephen calls his wife downstairs and, something very bad is about to happen, that she knows is about to happen. And of course, rather than go immediately downstairs, she kind of straightens the bed and makes sure everything looks perfect before she goes on her way. Even though something horrific is about to happen, it's about the illusion of control. There is no control. For me, there are two characters in the film that really carry the weight of the whole piece, and those characters for me would be Anna, who is played by Nicole Kidman, with just this really icy, kind of elegance and intelligence. And then there is Martin, who is one of the most fascinating villains that I've seen in a long time. Martin is played by a remarkable actor whose name I cannot really pronounce. It's like Barry Keoghan or something like that. But To me, this is like an Anthony Perkins, like Norman Bates level performance. I mean, this kid has it. I mean, he's got a face that just, it says a lot of things. It seems to be very naive, very blank, and like he has a quality of seeming kind of slow, but also like this chilling awareness and intelligence that contradicts that, and it comes at the most unpredictable moments. There's just violent aggression simmering beneath the surface of this person who just seems not all there, a little bit kind, a little bit awkward, and that contradiction is so gripping. Martin is an abstraction. He's basically just a big symbol for chaos, almost like in a biblical sense. He's just pure villainy, pure contamination. He spreads through humanity and reveals all of the ugliness, as I said, all the violence, all the toxicity, and he just does it like just dominoes, just fall and fall and fall. And in regards to this family, all of the deep desires and fears and all of the darkness all just bleeds through that perfectly laced, embroidered tablecloth. And another reason why I find this film intriguing, just from the way it's written and from the way it progresses, is, again, we've heard this story so many times, and we've seen like American Dream satires so many times to the point it's nauseating. But in this movie, it takes the idea of, oh, the American dream isn't very realistic and that we are very dark, toxic human beings. It takes that metaphor and opens it up in really interesting directions. Like, the movie constantly keeps you on your toes. I reviewed Thoroughbreds, I think about a year ago, which is kind of, it reminded me of this. It's also kind of a suburban satire thriller, with a lot of similar elements. But for me, this one is far superior to that film, because Thoroughbreds, for me, while it had a lot of interesting pieces in place and I had a lot of interesting scenes, I feel like a lot of it kind of ended about maybe even a third of the way, I can't remember, a third of the way, maybe halfway, where it felt like none of the characters, the rest of the characters that were introduced, were opening the story up in any way. They were kind of flattening it. It kept stilting the growth of, I think, its supporting characters and just the themes in general. But this film is different. You know, as I said, it remains consistent, but in a way it's always shifting and it's always keeping me guessing. New ideas are always coming into play, and yet it feels just very solid, more solid thematically. For me, Nicole Kidman actually gives one of the best performances in the movie, I think. And I also think she had maybe the most difficult role here. I think just when you look at the whole movie, she has the most fully realized arc. And I just think that she had the most ease with the dialogue, just in the transition. Just, you know, a lot of the characters, as I said, they start off very cold and very robotic, seemingly. And then as the movie goes on, it gets to be more manic and more pain is revealed. But with her, I feel like she was always rooted in that world, always. And even when the transition happens, with her, there's just an ease about it that is so much more mature. Because when it gets messy and when it gets vulnerable and she starts to get aggressive and we start to see her real character start to seethe and kind of come forward, it's exciting for us, and it feels like it was always meant to happen. She just has something, I think. She has a force about her, a strength and leadership that her husband does not have. He's got, you know, obviously this big ego, but yet when it comes down to it, like most people, he can't admit to his flaws. He can't admit to some of his greatest mistakes, even to his wife. He refuses to admit that he is wrong. She's the one who, to me, seems more strategic. She's the one who actually goes to Martin personally and says, you know, why are you doing this? And why should my family, why should my children and me have to suffer for this? She's the one actively changing it. And maybe part of that is because it was not her mistake. Of course, that's something to consider too. But there's just something about her. And I think also, even just in the way that they're shot, just with the wide angle lenses and all of that, that's part of it. But she just looks so much more dominant than her husband does. She's like this Grecian statue. And, you know, he's kind of more hairy and shorter, kind of frumpy. Colin Farrell obviously gained weight for the role. And the scene between her and Martin where he's eating the spaghetti is hilarious. And it's also just a really pivotal, great scene, because that's the moment when he explains to her and she realizes that it's not about justice. It's not about an eye for an eye, evening the score. It's about satisfying oneself. There is no way to stop this sort of chaos, this sort of destruction. It's inevitable. And her husband, no matter what, is going to have to make a huge sacrifice. Part of me wonders whether it would have been interesting to see maybe a later objective be introduced, see if they could break that destructive cycle in a way, give the protagonist an option, a chance to prove themselves or change the outcome of things. That way you could continue to open the themes of the story. I'm not saying that he would necessarily have to succeed or fail, but it might have been interesting. But yet at the same time, I also look at the film as a whole and the whole domino effect of Martin, and how, yes, like the whole idea behind all of it is just that, yes, it's all going to fail. Death is inevitable, and it's all going to unravel in a matter of time. So even if you do find a temporary solution, it's just temporary. And I feel like if you look at this movie as a whole and just thematically, each family member sort of represents different facets of growing up and that toxicity spreading through the different facets of one's life. You have the two adults who have already kind of, their innocence has died in a sense a long time ago. So they've already been integrated into this society, this conditioned lifestyle that they're kind of caged by, to the point where everything has become so routine and so monotonous, and they have just become, soulless. So because they've already gotten to that point, that chaos that is Martin, that abstraction, just reveals all of that weakness and that pain that has already been there, and maybe that has been buried by this monotony, by pretending to be perfect. And then you've got the two children who represent maybe a different time in one's life where that innocence is dying, especially in the daughter. She's kind of that transitional person in the family, that metaphor, because here she's falling in love, or she thinks that she's falling in love with Martin. Once you fall in love, and especially once you're rejected or once your heart is broken, especially the first time, that's something that fundamentally changes you. And you realize that love is a very dangerous thing potentially, and that it can lead to all kinds of destruction and pain. And that's starting to come out through her. She's starting to react to her mother in aggressive ways that she didn't before. And that climactic scene at the end of the film, you know what I'm talking about, where it all goes down. It's a really chilling, very dark scene as a result, but it also combines this eeriness as well as that brutality and the awkwardness and the comedy still. And that could have so easily fallen flat on its face. It could have so easily been offensive or just felt like it didn't work. And yet it doesn't, because this movie is so consistent, because it is so firmly rooted in its style, just head on. It does not relent. That is confidence. And, spoiler alert, of course, the one who ends up getting sacrificed is the son. He is the one who ends up getting killed. And yes, to continue with that idea, I do think that the son in a way is just a big symbol for how the American dream does change you, and it kills that little child within you, that innocent person. The parents have gone through that. The daughter is currently going through that because she's been burned. He hasn't had that yet. And so he is just, again, the definition of somebody losing that innocence completely and entering into this dark world that we have created. And that to me is just the final bleak knife in the fucking coffin of this movie. But yeah, I found it to be very interesting and very engaging, and I am very intrigued by other Lanthimos works. I obviously want to see the ones that I mentioned at the beginning of this review. It has certainly tickled my curiosity. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. All of my social media is below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like to. Catch you next time.